com o tema Contribuições da Linguística Sistêmico-Funcional para o Ensino de Línguas e Análise do Discurso. O objetivo deste evento é a discussão dos resultados das pesquisas desenvolvidas no Brasil, baseadas na aplicação da LSF, a pedagogia dos gêneros, a análise do discurso e a metodologia de descrição linguística. Agradecemos a presença dos palestrantes convidados, professor Geoff Thompson, from Liverpool University, professor Carlos Gouveia, da Faculdade de Letras da Universidade de Lisboa, professora Leila Bárbara, da PUC de São Paulo, professora Sara Cabral, da Universidade Federal de Santa Maria, e a professora Cristiane Fuser, da Universidade Federal de Santa Maria. Em nome da comissão organizadora deste evento, agradeço o apoio recebido pelo Decanato de Pesquisa e Pós-Graduação, pelo Instituto de Letras, pelo Departamento de Linguística, Português e Línguas Clássicas, pelo Programa de Pós-Graduação em Linguística da Universidade de Brasília. Para saudar os participantes, convidamos a compor a mesa a vice-diretora do Instituto de Letras da Universidade de Brasília, professora doutora Rosana Naves, a coordenadora brasileira do projeto Systems Across Languages Brasil, professora doutora Leila Bárbara, da PUC de São Paulo, e a chefe do Departamento de Linguística, Português e Línguas Clássicas da Universidade de Brasília, professora doutora Viviane Vieira. Então, eu passo agora a palavra, aos convidados para as suas saudações. A professora Leila, como a coordenadora do projeto brasileiro SAL.
Estamos todos no SAL. Eu agradeço a recepção aqui em Brasília, que para nós tem sido muito importante, as horas lugares e nós vamos chegar aqui ao OMB, que é um exemplo de universidade brasileira, um precursor das várias mudanças que a gente teve na universidade, Acho que tudo começou aqui e isso tem sido muito importante para o Brasil. Queria agradecer a todos os membros que aqui vieram, os membros do projeto SAL, e espero que a gente saia daqui com mais membros. O projeto SAL, como vocês sabem, é um projeto de análise sistêmica, em várias línguas, basicamente o inglês onde nasceu, Na América Latina temos várias contribuições de outros países, principalmente da Argentina e da Colômbia, então temos espanhol sendo desenvolvido também aqui dentro do guarda-chuva do SAL. E aqui no Brasil, felizmente, temos muita sorte de ter um conjunto muito grande de universidades importantes, das quais várias estão aqui presentes hoje. A gente agradece todos que vieram contribuir aqui para os trabalhos desses 3 dias, participar e discutir os seus desenvolvimentos. Eu acho que na sessão em que eu vou falar mais um pouco do SAL, a gente vai lembrar as várias universidades que participam do projeto. Nem sempre as pessoas têm condições de ir aos diversos encontros, mas esse aqui começou com um encontro nacional, sempre com foco na região, e tem várias pessoas de várias partes do país, inclusive porque a professora Edna foi muito gentil e convidou vários de nós para representarem o SAL aqui. Então, nós temos que agradecer muito essa oportunidade de estarmos aqui, de termos participado do encontro geral que começou na segunda-feira e dos vários convidados que a professora Edna trouxe para brilhantar o nosso trabalho. Eu vou tomar a liberdade de salientar os nossos 2 visitantes europeus, né? O professor Geoff Thompson e o professor Carlos Gouveia, que já demonstraram, como sempre, porque são nossos companheiros praticamente de SAL, mais do que visitantes, mas que já trabalharam nessa semana muito e nos deram uma contribuição realmente muito grande e muita food for thought dos 2, que nos obrigam agora a trabalhar bastante com as várias ideias que nos trouxeram. Então, tenho que agradecer a Edna também no esforço de fazer uma vertente internacional tão importante neste encontro. Às vezes a gente é muito modesto nos encontros. De vez em quando a gente tem um coordenador local que é muito ativo e consegue muita coisa para o projeto. E isso nós agradecemos muito o esforço da Edna, porque é sempre assim, né? Ela é muito ágil e ativa e batalhadora. O pessoal da casa sabe mais do que eu acho. Então, para nós é uma honra tê-la coordenando a vertente do projeto aqui na região central do Brasil, com um foco especial aqui no Brasil. E para a gente é sempre uma vantagem vir a Brasília, né? A gente sempre olha o que ela representa de futuro para o Brasil, há já muitos anos, né? Mas toda essa visão que a gente tem de Brasília, esses 2 bandidos que desenharam e construíram Brasília, né? Falo 2 nomes, porque eu sou muito nomes. O Carnemário e o... Então, é sempre essa luminosidade que a gente tem nessa sala. A gente tem no céu e nos monumentos de Brasília, né? É uma delícia. Às vezes a gente fica mais infeliz ou menos feliz ou mais feliz com a política, mas com o Brasil a gente sempre fica muito feliz, né? É uma honra estar trabalhando aqui e todo o esforço e todo, vamos dizer, o luxo que a gente está tendo aqui, né? Porque a gente está tendo uma comida maravilhosa, um lugar que eu tive que mencionar antes, porque afinal a parte acadêmica. Tão aprazível, tão lindo, tão luminoso para trabalhar, e uma gente que está nos tratando muito bem demais da conta, né? Deixa eu ver mais olhares aí de pessoal que está trabalhando tão intensamente numa ética. Então, eu queria realmente agradecer a acolhida que nós estamos tendo aqui, e a presença de tantos participantes, alguns já no projeto, e quem sabe mais alguns que se interessam a entrar para o projeto aqui, tanto localizados em Brasília, sobre a batuta, que você já viu que é muito boa, da professora Edna, né? E outros de outros locais que estejam dispostos a se juntar a nós. Tá certo? Eu acho que a gente está produzindo bem, está correndo bastante, uma equipe muito boa, que só vai ficar feliz tendo mais gente boa, com essa cara boa que a gente vê aqui. Tá? Muito obrigada, Edna, e muito obrigada ao MB em especial, pela acolhida que nos está dando, e pelos participantes mais permanentes da casa, e pelos que vieram até aqui contribuir conosco. Muito bom trabalho.
Bom dia, obrigada, professora Edna. Eu inicio com meus cumprimentos à mesa de abertura do terceiro SAL, a organizadora do evento, a professora Edna Silva, que tanto trabalhou, a coordenadora do projeto SAL, a professora Neida Bárbara, muito obrigada pela presença, e a vice-diretora do Instituto de Letras, professora Rosana, muito obrigada. Em nome do Departamento de Linguística, português e línguas clássicas. Eu inicio parabenizando a professora Edna Silva, a comissão organizadora, o comitê científico, por todo o trabalho, pela organização primorosa, né, por ter conseguido vencer os percalços institucionais e conseguir realizar esse belo evento nesse espaço, né, maravilhoso, com toda a organização que todos nós merecemos. Eu agradeço também, em nome do Departamento de Linguística, pela presença dos renomados, das renomadas professoras que vieram, né, compor o evento, abrilhantar e fazer, tornar possível esse evento. Aos participantes, às participantes também, nosso muito obrigada. E eu manifesto ainda a satisfação do LIP, da UMB, do IEL, em sediar o terceiro workshop SAL e contribuir para as pesquisas em linguística sistêmico-funcional, que é a nossa base linguística dos nossos estudos, já bastante consolidados na Universidade de Brasília, no programa de pós-graduação em linguística, né, que é a base linguística da análise do discurso crítica, e da linguística sistêmico-funcional, que conquista cada vez mais pesquisadores, pesquisadoras interessadas nos estudos sobre linguagem e sociedade. Então, eu desejo a todos nós 3 dias, né, na verdade 5, que já houve 2 dias de curso, um produtivo e harmonioso espaço para as nossas reflexões sobre as contribuições da linguística sistêmico-funcional para o ensino de língua e para a análise de discurso. Muito obrigada, bom trabalho para nós.
Obrigada, professora Viviane. Então, passamos a palavra para a professora Rosana Rigotta. Bom dia a todos. Para mim é um prazer enorme estar nessa mesa de abertura do terceiro SAL, né, que é mais breve, o Systemics Across Language, na semana justamente em que nosso curso de licenciatura Português, Língua e Literatura recebe a avaliação 5 da Comissão de Nós estamos muito felizes também porque esse é o nosso segundo curso de licenciatura avaliado nesse semestre. A licenciatura em inglês também recebeu nota 5 e o próximo curso a ser avaliado, a nota 5 é a máxima, né? A gente, numa escala de 1 a 5, é o 10. Então a gente já é nota 10, 5 do inglês, mais 5 do português. E o próximo a ser avaliado é justamente a licenciatura em português do Brasil como segunda língua. E a nossa expectativa agora não pode ser menor que 5. Então, temos trabalhado muito na perspectiva da adequação dos cursos de licenciatura a essa que é a nova perspectiva da formação de professores para o ensino de línguas e de literatura, né? Um pouco definida legalmente, quando o MEC fala lá de práticas como componentes curriculares, numa certa carga horária de estágio que se distingue do bacharelado. Então, saindo daquela ideia de que a licenciatura é um bacharelado mais alguma coisa na pedagogia, né? Mas, claro, sem prescindir dessa alguma coisa da pedagogia que é essencial para a formação do professor. Então, o LIP, o Departamento de Linguística Portuguesa e Línguas Clássicas, tem sido um ambiente muito profícuo de discussão nessa área, né? Tem sido vanguarda na proposição das mudanças em relação às licenciaturas. Então, daqui saem os pesquisadores como a professora Marta Antônia, a professora Márcia Antônia também, a Edna, as professoras do discurso que têm se dedicado também à pesquisa em ensino de línguas e até o pessoal da gramática, né, entre os quais eu me incluo, esse pessoal, que agora também deixa de seguir não deixa de seguir uma língua formal, mas dentro de uma língua formal começa a pensar também as questões de gramática no ensino. Tudo isso dando origem a uma nova linha de pesquisa no programa de pós-graduação em linguística, que foi aprovada esse ano para início, já agora em 2014. Embora já haja alunos, né, sendo orientados nessa linha. Além disso, vamos aprovado agora pelo nosso conselho universitário, a criação de mais uma licenciatura em Libras, tomando como base o português como segunda língua, né? Então, para início em 1º de 2015. Quer dizer, nós estamos aqui na efervescência das licenciaturas e por isso acho que um congresso com essa magnitude, resultado do trabalho sério de um grupo de pesquisa cadastrado no CNPq, traz relevo, né, traz importância a todo o trabalho que vem sendo desenvolvido aqui na UNB. Então, é uma satisfação para nós sediar esse evento, como a professora Leila disse, né, uma universidade que tem no seu projeto político-pedagógico institucional na origem, né, em Anísio Teixeira, um projeto que é realmente inovador na perspectiva do ensino superior, mas também no diálogo com a educação básica, né, o grande educador que foi Anísio Teixeira. E é importante também para a avaliação do próprio programa de pós-graduação em linguística, na perspectiva da internacionalização, da formação de rede, que um grupo desse representa, uma rede nacional, internacional, né? E com uma temática que eu estava me inteirando do evento no blog, e não só a temática do ensino de línguas, mas a preocupação em replicar experiências, né, que estão acontecendo internacionalmente e já no Brasil também, esse país continental, né, em que um Plano Nacional de Educação tem que contemplar a educação básica, não só da perspectiva do que é um currículo de educação básica, mas também do que é a educação indígena, a educação quilombola, a educação do campo, a educação de surdos, né, a educação inclusiva de maneira mais ampla. Então, o desafio não é pequeno, né? É necessário realmente começar a replicar as experiências. O Departamento de Linguística, Português e Línguas Clássicas e o Instituto de Letras têm participado de vários programas do governo federal, né, apoiados pela CAPES. Então, eu queria citar pelo menos 2 aqui. É o programa de bolsas de iniciação à docência. Nós temos 20 bolsistas no português e 10 bolsistas no curso de inglês, atuando nas escolas sob supervisão de professores da universidade, mas também com supervisor na escola, né? E o programa de consolidação das licenciaturas, da qual eu sou coordenadora institucional, e que eu acho que são experiências que tem de trabalhar, a gente conversava no início, né? Tem de se fortalecer conjuntamente, porque senão ficam sendo ações isoladas que não formam uma massa crítica em torno do grande problema e das soluções para a educação. Então, espero que desse encontro a gente consiga fortalecer todas essas ações, começar a trabalhar em grupo e que disso decorra realmente uma transformação na educação no Brasil, que é disso que a gente precisa para dar um grande salto no desenvolvimento. Tá? Desejo a todos, agradeço a Edna. Sem a Edna, não, isso não sai na progressão funcional da gente de dia, né? É o mesmo ponto para todo mundo, mas o esforço da Edna em organizar um evento dessa magnitude realmente é digno de louvor. Agradecer todo o esforço conjunto aqui do departamento, do programa de pós-graduação em linguística e do decanato no apoio financeiro ao evento, na hora que as agências de fomento estavam ali raspando os tachos e fechando o ano. Então, foi um esforço conjunto realmente que deu origem. E a presença de todos os participantes, aos convidados externos, dizer que nós somos uma universidade que está aberta, um instituto que está aberto a recebê-los sempre, e desejar a todos um bom evento.
Então, agradeço às professoras da mesa, agradeço aos participantes pela presença
e meu agradecimento especial à comissão organizadora, que sem eles não teria sido possível. Eu peço até que vocês se levantem para ser reconhecidos. Levanta a mão. Gostaria também de registrar a presença da nossa coordenadora do programa de pós-graduação em Linguística. Está ali sentadinho, escondidinho, mas deu um apoio fundamental do programa para a vinda dos convidados. Professora Viviane presente. Então, nesse momento, nós desfazemos a mesa. Temos uns 10 minutos para um coffee break de abertura, para o terceiro workshop SAL. O professor Geoff Thompson é um membro sênior honorário na Escola de Inglês da Universidade de Liverpool. Antes da sua aposentadoria, foi professor de Linguística Aplicada em Liverpool e diretor do curso de mestrado em Linguística Aplicada e formação de professores de inglês como segunda língua. Ele é um dos editores da revista Functions of Language. Suas publicações recentes incluem Evaluation in Context, Introducing Functional Grammar, System and Corpus, Exploring Connections e artigos sobre tema-rema, transitividade, sistemas interpessoais na interação, a metáfora gramatical, conjunção no texto e a variatividade. Com vocês, professor Geoff Thompson.
As before, I hope I can talk without the microphone. If it's too quiet, let me know. As always, I begin with the interpersonal before I move on to the experiential. So, first of all, I have to apologise for the fact that I don't speak Portuguese. I feel very limited. But also, more pleasantly, I have to thank Edina and the organisers for the invitation to come here. It's always, when I see I've got an invitation to Brazil, great. It's always a lovely feeling. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to come to Brasilia for the first time. I also have to say a little special thanks to Alessandro, who's been, amongst all the other helpers, has really been helping me, showing me Brasilia, helping me survive without my suitcase. He even managed to bring his wife in because I had to buy some new jeans and they were too long, so his wife short. That is really going beyond the call of duty. But I'm very grateful for all of that. It's really made life a lot easier. Okay, in this talk, I'm glad in a way, I'm first in the programme because I'm very conscious that most people will be working on very practical, applied issues. My talk's going to be largely theoretical, but it's mostly about English, basically. But I think the issues that I'm talking about, I hope, first of all, will apply pretty much equally to any language, including Portuguese, to any discourse analysis, and I think these are the issues that I'll come on to, particularly in the second part of the talk, are ones that many discourse analysts working with very applied material are going to need to consider. You may already have worried about these issues, because so often we are working with corpora. And corpora means counting at some level. And I'm going to be arguing counting can be a problem. Not a problem, but there are many issues around counting. The other interpersonal bit, just before I begin, as I said in the mini course, if I tend to get a bit fast. I try and speak slowly and clearly, but when I get interested, I tend to speak a bit faster. So please don't be embarrassed to say, hang on, slow down a bit, please, or repeat that, or even to ask questions. There will be time for questions at the end, but if there's anything that you really think, I don't understand, and so I'm not going to be able to understand the rest, please don't hesitate. In many cultures, when I say that, I know that everybody in the audience will go, and no movement. In Brazil, fortunately, I know that when people do have questions, they ask them, which is great. That's one of the reasons why I enjoy working in Brazil. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about CHL complementarities and perspective of interpersonal grammatical metaphors. As Carlos said in his mini course, in SFL, and I'm sure you know this, we have a stratified model of language. So we have a triple articulation. We don't just see language as a single thing, we actually divide it into three, at least three. There are more, but three I need to do. And the relationship is one of realization. So phonology, expression, play, realizes lexicography, which realizes semantics. And particularly what I'm interested in is the lines, the divisions between those strata. So the strata, the line between phonology and lexicography is experientially arbitrary. So there is no reason why, phonologically, why cat in English should be cat. There's nothing in there. Notice Jim Martin emphasizes experientially arbitrary, because in fact intonation, which is in the phonological stratum, can realize interpersonal and textual meanings. So there is a link. So if I use certain patterns of intonation, it may have an interpersonal meaning. It may show, for example, excitement, involvement, or it can also show, I've come to the end of a section in my talk, and I'm now going to move on to a new section. And then I go up and start a new section. So these kinds of things, they are meaningful in terms of the lexicography and semantics. But experientially, what the noises we make do not have a natural link with the grammar or the semantics. The boundary between lexicography and semantics, on the other hand, is, again, this is Jim Martin's term, solidarity. I don't want to go too much into that, but basically it means, being very simple, something like natural. There is a link, so that, being very simple, a change of wording brings about a change of meaning. And there are ways in which we can see certain things that happen in the lexicography are typically associated with certain things in the semantic stratum. We see this if we start, in one sense, doing typically is realized by a verbal piece of language, a verbal group. A thing is typically realized by a nominal. Certainly in England, and I guess in Brazil, you're often taught a noun is a name of a thing, person, or entity, and the verb is a doing word. It's not really true, but it goes enough. However, and here I'm only looking at the experiential domain. Now, if it was always like that, we would not really need a stratal model. We wouldn't need to think about strata, lexicography and semantics. If one bit in the lexicogrammar always had the same function semantically, we wouldn't really need the straighter. And you can see this in baby's proto-language, for example. This is taken, I think, from Jane Torr's study. When the baby said "ma," it meant "there's food, I want some." Always. So whenever the child wanted food, it said "ma," and that was the only reason it used "ma." It didn't use "ma" for anything else. Te means "I want Teddy," not just "there's Teddy" or "where's Teddy," but just "I want Teddy." So in that case, I've taken away the strata line because it's not really necessary. There's a one-to-one relationship. It's a bit like, the traditional traffic lights. Red means stop. It doesn't mean anything else. You can't say, well, in some contexts, red might be used to be look out, there are pedestrians on the road ahead. No, it doesn't. However, the fact that there's a possibility that we have the two strata basically means there's a possibility of varying the relationship between them, between the lexicogrammar and the semantics. So there's a kind of tension possible, so that, for example, we can talk about doing using a form, a lexicogrammatical form, a nominal group, which normally, congruently, has not evolved in the language to express doing, and normally expresses things, but so we end up with a new meaning, a doing thing. Something which has, as it were, a combination of the semantics, but the wording contributes some of the meaning, so we end up with a new combined meaning. It's not just that the doing now becomes a thing. It's still a doing at some level, but it's thing-like because it's expressed, it's realised by a nominal group. Let's have a look at that. I'm starting with experiential grammatical metaphor, ideational grammatical metaphor, because I think people are more familiar with that, and in some ways it's easier to see what's going on. So if I take, well, no better, but if I take that, I've already sticked up, here's a very typical sentence from a medical reference book. Investigation by blood culture and aspiration, immobilization and the prompt administration of the appropriate antibiotics may occasionally lead to resolution. Lexicogrammatically, very simple. The nominal, a verbal, and a nominal. I've forgotten occasionally for the verbal, but basically that's one. Very nice, simple sentence. If you are an expert, if you're a doctor, you will read that and you will immediately understand it. But underlying it, and for someone like me who is not a doctor, who is not a medical expert, I, in a sense, have to expand it into its clausal form. So, what we get is, and this is, I think this is what it means, but I'm not 100% sure. If the doctor, notice I've had to realise at some level that it's the doctor that does the investigation, not someone else. Fairly obvious, but it's not there in the original language. Investigates the problem, because investigate as a process is a two-participant process. By culturing blood, don't ask me exactly what that is, and by aspirating blood, I had no idea what aspiration was, in that sense. I had to go onto Google and look for a lot. I think you aspirate blood, but many people say they don't correctly. And if he, she or he, the doctor, immobilizes the patient's joints. There I did have to ask someone to work out Does it mean immobilise the patient completely, or just the joint, the hip joint, which is where the problem is, and it's the joint? I didn't know that. A doctor would not need to be told this. If you're trying to work with this kind of text as a non-specialist, then you're having to do a lot of work to, as it were, reconstitute what might have been a more natural way of talking about this, so that you can get the semantics. And if he administers the appropriate antibiotics promptly, this may occasionally solve the problem. Notice, I actually had, when I first started this, I thought it meant investigation by blood culture aspiration, immobilisation, and it's not. It's investigation by blood culture aspiration and immobilisation and administration. So I had to work out that actually that first bit was not all post-modifying investigation, but was 3 coordinated groups. Now, if you're a specialist, you don't have to do that, precisely because you've been taught. You've started with explanations like the bottom, and you have gradually got to the point where you no longer need those explanations because they're internalized. Also notice, it's not just the nominal group, other things go along with it. It's the whole syndrome, so that lead to means if X, then the result is Y. So what would normally be a conjunction, as it were, that leading gets moved to the process slot. So this kind of ideational grammatical metaphor involves the whole clause, not just process realised as nominal, but other things happen as well. Okay, now I think most people, I hope, most people will be familiar with that kind of grammatical metaphor. There's been a lot of work on experiential, ideational grammatical metaphor. If any of you are working with technical, academic, scientific text, you will have had to face that. And I know that in Portuguese you've got exactly the same, or very similar kinds of processes going on. But I'm actually interested in interpersonal grammatical metaphor. Now here's the kind of an example. I'll start with 2 examples. I will explain what I mean by the terms I'm going to use. I wouldn't do it that way if I were you.
Don't
do it, yes. But clearly it is intended as technically a command, advice, but a command. But it's worded as a declarative. What we usually use declaratives for statements, for telling people information, not for ordering them, not for suggesting or trying to influence their behaviour. And another one, a well-known one. I think it isn't uploaded yet, is it? I mentioned this in the mini course, so you'll be familiar. Notice, I think it isn't uploaded yet. Is it? Not don't I. Grammatically, a tag question in English picks up on the dominant clause, the independent clause. Here, the independent clause apparently is I think, but that's not what you tag. Now I would see these as 2 very different kinds of grammatical metaphor. The first grammatical metaphor is enacted, and I'll come back and explain what I mean by that in a moment. And in the second, it's a question of representing. Enacting interpersonal meaning, representing interpersonal meaning. What the hell do I mean by that? Okay, if you look at that one, I wouldn't do it that way if I were you. It's clearly intended as a command. Semantically, it is a command. I'm trying to influence the other person's behaviour. But it's expressed as declarative, as if giving information about self, about yourself. This is about what I would do. Okay? So it's the command function is there. If the other person goes ahead and does it in that way, your command has not been successful. But if you look at it, what they're telling you is I'm giving you information about how I would behave, and that is still there. It doesn't disappear. It's not that that is lost completely. The meaning or the function of I wouldn't do it that way if I were you comes from the fact that it's a command expressed as if it was a statement about myself. So the two things contribute. One way of looking at this, and here I'm using something from Vídeo. Looking at the semantic stratum, next to the grammatical stratum, I'm sure you'll be familiar with that. The commodity, goods and services versus information, exchange. And the four primary speech functions: offer, command, goods and services, depending on whether we're offering goods and services, offer, or demanding goods and services. And statement, we offer, we give information. Question, we ask for, we demand information. And so in SFL, any stretch of language whose function is to give information is a statement. But then if we move down to the lexicon grammar, we've only got, well, we've got three mood types in English. We've got the imperative, indicative, declarative, or interrogative. So you can tell an interrogative because of its form. In English, if the finite comes before the subject, it's an interrogative. You don't know what its function is till you look at it in context. You don't know what it's doing on the semantics until you look at it in context. What happens though? So normally, a proposition giving or demanding information uses the indicative, it's either declarative or interrogative. And there we are. A command most naturally is realised by an imperative. That is, if you like, that's why the imperative has evolved in the language. But of course, it doesn't always work like that. So we can have a command realised as an interrogative. Sorry, a command realised as a declarative. Let's start with that one. I wouldn't do it that way if I were you, for example. And then we get a subtype of command, advice. We normally say, I wouldn't do it that way if I were you, is advice rather than command. But the command here is a technical term. Similarly, command may be realised by an interrogative, and then that may function as a polite request. So it's still a command, but could you pass the salt? It's an interrogative, but it's functioning as a command. What's happened then is the structure has contributed meaning, allowing us to be more negotiatory, to refine our interaction. I still want you to do it, but if I use particular forms to express my wish for you to behave in a certain way, it will add things like typically politeness or softening, or the opposite. Okay, so to take one example from data I had. So it got worse overnight, says the doctor. Yeah, says the patient. So it got worse overnight is a declarative. The patient, however, understands it as intending as a particular kind of question, a request for confirmation, and gives it. Normally, if you have a declarative statement, typically, one reaction would be, oh, I went to the cinema last night. Oh, I give information the other person acknowledges. But here, it's clear that the patient has seen it as needing a reply. Lebov, way back in 1972, introduced the idea of A events and B events. A events are things that I, the speaker, know about. B events are things that you, the listener, the addressee, know about. So he's put it as, if A makes a statement about a B event, it is heard as a request for confirmation. That's not actually terribly accurate, because is it a statement or a question? Well, with SFL, we can be a bit more accurate. If A utters a declarative clause about a B event, it is heard as a question, request for confirmation. So it's still a question, but the fact that it's a declarative, as it were, makes it a particular kind of question. It's not just an open question, but it's a request for confirmation. And we can see that that's then only going to happen in certain cases. Can you predict that kind of what's called sometimes called a quicklarative? A question declarative, quicklarative. Who is more likely to use them, doctor or patient?
Who's likely to use?
Which of the two, doctor, patient, in general, is more likely to use quicklarative? The doctor, yeah, not the patient. The patient, in my data, I have very few examples of the patient, in fact, virtually none, the patient using a declarative to the doctor. So it's partly things like a question of authority. The doctor and also role. What is the doctor? The doctor is trying to get enough information to work out what is wrong with the patient. They kind of know the field generally, but they don't know exactly what is wrong with the patient. So they can, as it were, well, I would argue, they actually show, I know, but I don't quite know. If I ask an interrogative question, it shows I don't know, I need your information. If I ask a declarative question, it simultaneously shows I know, but I need you to confirm. So it's doing declarativeness work plus questioning work. In other words, we've got a new kind of meaning which comes from the combination of the declarative wording and the the question function. That's what we mean by enacting. We can't point to one bit of that and say, that is the questioning bit. It's the whole choice which enacts a declarative question, this kind of a request for information. Notice it's also because of, although I'm not going into this, it's also because of the kind of, the transitivity is involved. If the doctor said, you have very big feet, it is a statement about the other person, but it's not likely to be heard as a question, as a request for confirmation. So we do also have to look at what exactly is the context. But in the right context, a declarative clause about the B event will be heard as a request for confirmation. So what we've got there is a declarative as if a statement about you. but it's functioning as a question. And it's both are going on at the same time. The analyst needs to pull these apart. The people involved don't. This is just how it's done in the culture. In our culture, anyway, but for the analyst, in order to understand why it is, for example, that doctors use more of these than patients, we need to pull the two apart and think, okay, what does each, the wording and the meaning contribute to bring about a new meaning which makes it appropriate in that context for this person to use it, but not for the patient. If we don't pull it apart, it's very difficult to explain what's going on. I had an argument with Ruqayya Hassan about this. She said, oh yeah, but that's always how it's done. That's always how it is done. We don't need the concept of grammatical metaphor. My argument is, yes we do, because unless we can look at the two things that are happening and see that they're coming to a new meaning, we can't explain why is it that this happens in our culture. But I'll leave that for future argument with time. Okay, let's now look at the other one, which is the one I'm more interested in, representing. I've used the term representing because, of course, if you remember, experiential transitivity is clause as representation. So here, the modality is now clausified. Rather than having a modal verb or a modal adjunct, maybe it isn't, it may not be. We have I think. It is one of the features. Now this won't work for all, but one of the features of most of these. Prototypically, the subject is I or we, or can be you, typically in interrogatives. Present tense or modalised, and a mental cognition from this process. It projects a clause which is modally assessed. So that proposition, it isn't uploaded yet, is being modally assessed. The tag picks up on the projected clause. The projected clause can be omitted without affecting the ideational content. I'm still telling you it isn't uploaded yet. I'm just adding my stance to it. And in some cases, polarity transfer is possible. So instead of saying, I think it isn't, I'd say, I don't think it is. And there are slight differences in meaning, but essentially you're saying the same thing, not yet uploaded. Oh, sorry. But notice you can also get things like, I'd say it's not a fair deal, is it? But typically, I or we subject. Present tense or modalised, I'd. It's a verbal process, and it labels a projected clause in which the act I've said I'm going to do is performed. So I'd say, and here it is, I'm saying it. A tag picks up on the projected clause. That was the original. I'd say it's not a fair deal, is it not? Would I? The projected clause to be omitted without affecting the ideational content is not a fair deal, is it? And in some cases, polarity transfer is possible. I wouldn't say it's a fair deal, is it? I'd say it's not a fair deal, is it? Notice, incidentally, is it is still the tag. Which is interesting because it's taking the negative from here and the verb from the auxiliary from here. Normally, if it's a fair deal, isn't it? Normally polarity, but there the negative is taken from the I wouldn't say. So we seem to have two things going on. One is modality, which has already been well described, but also speech act. We can label our speech act, the speech act that we are performing in the rest of that clause complex. So we can modalise what I'm going to tell you, I think, or we can signal we can label our own speech act and then go on to perform the speech act. Means that modality and speech role, speech function, can both be experientialised. Again, I'm sure this is true, you'll have to tell me, but I'm sure this is basically the same in Portuguese. It will work differently, but the essential features, I think, can be done. So the only difference there between the modal ones and the speech act ones are to have a verbal process instead of a mental process. Here's some examples. These are the speech act labeling. I swear I'm not making this up. So I'm not making this up. This is an oath. I swear. I must admit, I get tired early when I work out heavy. I get tired when I work out heavy. I'm signalling, I must admit, I'm not, I don't really want to say this, but we would like to emphasise, it's not our intention. By saying that, they are actually emphasising it. So they're telling us in advance, this is something important. So those things in bold are really doing interpersonal work. They're not part, and sometimes they might be called meta-discourse in other approaches. I'm wondering whether, and notice, I'm wondering, declarative, question mark. In other words, this person, this writer, meant it as a question. So I'm wondering whether that means, will it be better? Firstly, could I ask you whether? And again, there is a question mark, but of course it's an interrogative. But could I ask you whether we saw a bit something like this in the Vídeo. It's basically negotiating the right to answer this question. But the question is what I want you to answer. Labelling proposals, commands. I suggest that you take a look at the new board designs. In other words, take a look at the new board designs. At least if you're trying to look intelligent by degrading me, then could I advise you to at least come up with some new insights? Do this, come up with some new insights. There, the negotiation is clearly done sarcastically. This happens also with, we know, objective modality, objective explicit, what Halliday calls explicit objective modality. It's possible that there is some likelihood of that. So it's either an embedded clause or a post-modifier. And sometimes we can get this kind of objective for speech act labelling. So it doesn't happen so much. It's suggested here that on this basis we put forward the argument panel. So this is quite widespread. And it's using projection. Now this bit is more tenuous and more theoretical, so if you want to go to sleep for 10 minutes, that's fine. We'll come back to the application in a moment. But I'll just say, I'm interested. Why is it that interpersonal grammatical and projection have this affinity? Interpersonal metaphor of the representing kind, where my attitude or my speech act is apparently part of the representation in the transitivity. Well, we start by thinking about, as it were, normal mental processes, projecting. They decided that they were not to get off the train. No problem there, that's simply telling us what went through their minds and what happened as a result. But interestingly, very often, even when it's past tense and it's the process seems to be this happened in the past, in other words, it's not really attitude. He wondered if there were really other worlds out there. She thought the songs were great. These are borderline because they have to do with questioning, with being uncertain. So they are, even though they are actually, I would label them simply as mental processes, wonder and thought, rather than modality, they're getting towards the kinds of things he wondered. In other words, what we're thinking of in his brain went through, are there really? She thought something great in her opinion. So they're on the edge with modality and speech acts. Notice that when you have a quote, this does not apply. I must not be afraid of what I must do, she thought. In other words, it's not quoted thought that comes into this. It's only reported thought that is relevant. So, if you think about it, get with projections. You have a proposition. Very example moment. And that, oh sorry, that one. Keep going on too fast. That proposition may get in the scope of a projecting clause. Okay. This isn't Haldane, by the way. You can see it as dependent. But other people like Mandela Dotte and got another name, Bill McGregor, see it as scope. That the projecting clause has scope over the projected clause. So this is telling us something about what he claimed, and the tag would be, he claimed bank is still the fund, didn't he? His proper projection, as it were. We can also have reaction to an embedded fact proposition. A fact proposition which is embedded means it's not that I'm, as it were, bringing this idea into being as I talk. If I say, he claimed that, the proposition bankers take all the funds is being brought into existence through his claiming. But with an embedded clause, it's as if this proposition is already there somehow and I'm reacting to it. Not that I've said it or someone else, but simply it is there, it's treated already as existing. So he resented that the bankers steal the funds. Notice the implication, the presupposition there is that bankers do indeed steal the funds. If you say he claimed that the bankers steal the funds, you say, well, no, he's wrong. Here it's more difficult because that is treated as already there, it's a fact, and he feels bad about it. Now, Halliday has pointed out that interpersonal meanings are field-like. They kind of surround the proposition in a field. This is why if you swear, and I won't give you too many, well, I won't give you any examples to be polite, but if you swear, you can swear many times in the same clause just to show, again, I'm annoyed about something. You don't have to just put it in one place. Whereas normally, for example, the experiential is bitty. So you have one actor. But you can have swearing at different points, and it just means I'm angry about it, or I'm upset about it. You can have modality. It's possible that he may be ill, perhaps. I can have the modality expressed in several different places. It's not tied to one part. So interpersonal meaning, function and stance, is like a cloud, a field around. For example, certainly the bankers steal the funds. I'm still telling you the bankers steal the funds, but I'm giving you my attitude, which is to the whole proposition. Or, subject that order, do the bankers steal the funds? That makes the whole thing a question, an interrogation. Okay? It doesn't apply, although it's one particle of these clause, the whole clause then is an interrogative. Now, if we think about, I think the bank will steal funds, we've got a kind of combination. The I think is part of modality, but it also is the wording in the lexicographer. It is, it holds, it has the, it frames the proposition the bank will steal funds. So you get a kind of combination of the two. I'd say the bank will steal the funds. So that's to do with my speech act, my interaction with you, but lexicogrammatically, it is holding it in its scope. I wonder whether turning that into a question. It can be argued that there is an embedded clause, and it's not surprising. That's actually appraisal. I'm not going to go into, I'm not sure whether appraisal using this is really metaphor, but it uses the same structure. You have one clause which gives you my attitude, holding in its scope the whole proposition, which is the bank steals funds. So, what's happening is that the interpersonal meanings are being experientialized. Halliday Martin talked about this as raising the modality or the attitude from, for example, a group or a word, modal verb, or an adjunct, to the level, to the status of a clause. I think we can also see this concretizing, turning it into something which looks as though it's part of the experiential content. One advantage of that, of course, as been pointed out, is that because the interpersonal is now experientialized, it's become a clause, I can do a lot more with a clause than I can do with a group or a word. It seems highly likely, if not absolutely certain, that I can play around with the degree of certainty. Do you think I can perhaps ask you to enlighten me? I do a lot of negotiation. I can bring in modality there in order to soften the negotiation to have the right to ask the question. The other thing you can do is to, as it were, treat the interpersonal, experientialized interpersonal meaning as if it was experiential. My mother-in-law, now passed on, gladly, I've used her quite a lot because she was a wonderful source of odd things going on in language. She actually learned, she was not an educated person, very nice, but she learned, she'd say something and my wife and I would look at each other and smile, and she'd say, oh, I've been discoursally deviant, haven't I? And this was one of her discoursal deviancies. I think it's really terrible, don't I, Frank? So she would have a tag which picked up on the I think. So there, the negotiation and feeling needed support from her husband, Frank, took over from, she still thought it was really terrible. And you get other examples. If I'm paying for a ticket, that should include the price of toilet paper, I would think. Yes, you would think. So in a sense, this is a dialogue in one text, but the writer treats that I would think as if it was not interpersonal specifically, but actually part of the transitivity. And can I ask you to review my site? You can, but I make no promises. So rather than, yes, I will review your site, yes, you can ask me. So I wonder what would happen, what would have happened. So you can wonder as much as you like. There's a famous example, I may get it wrong, of an Australian, a colleague in Australia going into a cake shop and saying, I wonder if you have any this kind of cake. And the person behind the counter said, Why wonder? They're right in front of you. Well, he was very politely asking, could I have? But the other person took it as, if you like, the literal meaning. And that is, for me, one of the criteria of metaphor. That you can respond to it as if it were congruent. It doesn't typically happen. We are typically cooperative language users. But the option is always there. And in fact, of course, there have been various studies showing that children don't always get this. You know, they don't understand when interpersonal modality is being used.
We have a similar construction in Portuguese, exactly the same thing. When you go and ask for a coffee and you say, queria café, and on the other side the person says, queria, já não quer.
Yeah.
It's like you don't want it anymore.
Yes, exactly. So it's always possible to do that.
I beg your pardon. Would you repeat, please, the criteria you has just said?
Yeah. For me, one criterion of grammatical metaphor, interpersonal grammatical metaphor, both kinds, both the enacting, I wouldn't do it that way if I were you. The person could say, I know you won't. You can respond to it as if the lexicogrammatical structure were the meaning, were expressing the meaning congruently. Or with this, where you have modality or speech function as a clause, you can respond to the clause as if it were part of the, not the interpersonal, but part of the experiential meaning. So normally we ignore that. We jump straight to, I wonder whether I could. Of course you can, is the response. In other words, we just see, I wonder whether as polite negotiation. But I could answer, you can wonder, much as you like. So it's the possibility of, as it were, responding to the meaning, which is what we normally do, this new meaning, which is very often polite or more nuanced, or we can respond to the wording as if that's what the person was really saying. And that for me is metaphor is both. So that's a kind of summary. Mapping interpersonal grammatical metaphor. We've got mood and speech function. We can enact, which is entirely within the mood and speech function. So I use one mood speech function pairing to do it something different. I use declarative, not to make a statement, but to make a request. But that's all within the mood and speech function. Or I can represent it. Interpersonal can, as it were, take hold of experiential and use it for negotiation, for interpersonal purposes. And a little bit of appraisal, but I'm not so much of that. So, what does this mean? So far, I've really used a lot of Halliday Matheson, chapter 10. I've pushed beyond it on the Speech Act labelling, but they bring that in the latest edition. And certainly the modality, kinds of modality metaphors have been recognised and explored by Halliday. And it was Halliday who first pointed out that indirect speech acts are actually mood metaphor. And so that's the enacting. But what does it mean? Well, Halliday, in a very nice little book from 2008, when as a spring chicken, he was only about 82 when he wrote it. It's an excellent book, based on 3 lectures that he gave moving around Britain. He talks about complementarities in language. Lexis versus lexis grammar, different ways of realising the same or similar meanings. We can do it lexically, or we can do it grammatically, or we can do it both. We can look at language as system or language as text. The idea of instantiation. We talked about language as system as climate, language as text as weather. So what we experience today is weather. What we experience in language is text. But behind that, if we stand back in terms of time and distance, we can look across a bigger span and we see climate. And that is language as system. Speaking and writing, as he said, these are not just different ways of doing the same thing, but ways of doing different things, but clearly related. So we have these complementarities, and we can do it like that. That enables language to be more, to be used more. He says complementarity means having things both ways. Eat your cake and have it. He insists that that's the correct way, and usually in English say have your cake and eat it, which doesn't make sense. He says it's not you eat your cake and have it. They provide the surplus energy, the flexibility that enables the language to flourish in its changing social environment. Complementarity is what turns either or into both and. Light is either particle or wave. It can't be both, but it is. We have to choose what it is we want to know, what we want to measure, where a thing is or how fast it's going. Grammar has no place for either orism. It always turns either or into both and. And the bit I'm particularly interested in there, we have to choose what it is we want to know, what we want to measure. And in line with that, I would say we can actually think of another complementarity, text as wording and text as meaning, particularly because of this issue of grammatical metaphor. Now, rather quickly, when we get into practical matters, corpus analysis, etc., we have to decide what we count. Do we count where a thing is or how fast it's going? Do we count particle meaning, experiential meaning? Remember, particulates mean bit by bit, so constituents, actor, process, gone. Or field meaning, interpersonal. And in this case, do we count wording or meaning? I'll give just a few examples of problems I've had. Here's a text. First, it's possible that certain nutrients in cellular environment in ways. Some nutrients do this. Since there's evidence of oxidization further. Second, it's been suggested that food may alter hormone production of this. However, it is well known that certain tumours, interestingly, there is some evidence of soybean. But from an online academic article, I'm showing you the text itself. I can't be bothered to go back to that. What I've done here is to pull out the initial bits which are to do with negotiating the status of what I'm telling you, what the writers are telling you. Okay? No, it's possible that, there's evidence that, it's been suggested that, well known that, there's some evidence that. This is all to do with modality. They are metaphorical, typically, particularly this objective modality, negotiating the status of what follows, because I'm basically writing this for peers. I can't just say this is the fact. I need to negotiate it. But what happens when we do a transitivity analysis? Well, what I've done here, I've done the transitivity analysis of those. I've underlined the other processes, but I haven't got the analysis in. What do I count? Do I say, I've got in those interpersonal negotiation clauses, I've got 2 relational, 1 existential, and 2 verbal processes. Do I count them? What I call true experiential, that's in the rest. There are 11 of them. Do I then say, well, I'm only going to report those 11? I'm going to report all of them? Or I'm going to try and report 2 separate? In what sense, there is some evidence that it's not part of the transitivity. It's not really what I'm telling you. I'm telling you what follows. I'm negotiating those things. What do I count? Now, you can say, well, look, that's 1/3. Okay, I chose this piece especially because it has a lot of that, but if you go into academic writing, you will get a lot. Maybe not quite as high as 33% roughly, but quite a considerable proportion. What do? You just ignore the fact that this is not really part of the transitivity, or you try and bring it in, or you just say, well, I'm only actually going to look for transitivity, I'm only interested in the true experiential. Here's another one which we looked at in the mini coursal. Sally, the interview on television. Again, well, stop. But let me ask you, Sally, I feel that, because the thing that seems to me is that, I feel this, can I ask? All of these for me are interpersonal metaphor, they're negotiating. What I'm asking, what I think is in the other part. And again, if we do the analysis, there's the transitivity and the others are just underlined. 7 out of 32 are not true experiential. Okay, for the listener, there's no point. It's only the analyst, the corpus linguist, who has to decide what I can do. Do I, again, just say there are only really 25 processes, or there are 32 processes, or, well, there are 7 of these and 25 of this kind. Most people choose one or the other. We don't give both, or all 3. I'll jump over that. I don't know if you know Mick O'Donnell's UAM corpus tool. I think everybody's familiar with Wordsmith. This does different things. It's a fantastic free download tool, UAM corpus tool. It allows you to put text in and analyze it. You have to do the analysis, but it then summarizes the analysis for you.
Only in English word again.
UAM, Universidad Autónoma de Madrid.
Okay.
Corpus tool. Corpus tool, 1 word. Type that into Google, you'll get taken to the site, and it's free download. And one of these times I'll come to Brazil and do a session training, but not today. Now what Mick is doing increasingly is to add automatic parsing and analysis. Normally you have to do it all yourself. But he has had to make this choice. So the theme, I feel that Sally, he just says the things I think I. He doesn't take into account that I feel that could be interpersonal theme. He's had to make a choice, and all of us do. Very quickly, just to round off, to give you some ideas, looking back at the theme, I'm working with Mark Berry and Hillier, looking at a small corpus, trying to look at what happens in theme in this small corpus and how it corresponds to the different genres in the corpus. So I gather you're having a bit of a tiring time, not too difficult, but if I want to do a theme analysis, well, we've got I gather, which is an interpersonal metaphor for me, but not for Margaret Berry. So, I can say I is the thing. I could say, I gather your I gather you. 2 clauses, 2 things. Or the way I do it is, I gather you. Interpersonal, I gather you, experiential. 3 options already for a very simple example like that. Not too bad, you think? Here's another bit from our corpus. Further, it's important to note that although the discussion is concerned principally with exploring, etc. How do I narrow speak? Well, further is okay. That goes in. We've also there got it's important, which is for me personal, to note that if note, as I read it, means say, then the writer goes on to say what she says she's going to note. So it's, again, speak chat tagging. So the Halliday, I think, would say further it. Martin did it several times that, you better change. Who am I to tell you what to do? We could say, well, I want to go on and include that one, plus it, so there are 3 things there. I could go on and say, well, I want to go up to there, the beginning of the subordinate clause, plus it. Or I want to include all the subordinate clause, and it's important to note that is interpersonal, and then I get the experiential, the whole subordinate clause. Or if I'm one of those, and I'm not personally, but if I'm one of those people who wants to include the subject, I put it. So I have 5 different possibilities from one sentence if I'm trying to analyse things. Part of it is, do I include subject or not? But a large part is to do with the grammatical metaphor. What do I do about it? Margaret tends to go for the wording. She doesn't really believe in interpersonal metaphor. And I'm not going to spend too long trying to explain that. I believe in the things in it. When we're looking at interpersonal, that's how she does it, that's how I do it. Same text. And we're writing an article together. We ended up by making it, we're writing an article about how different people analyse things differently. But also, if you think about interpersonal things, she, in the same data, she gets 21, I get 43. So which one is right? Well, both are right. One thing I'd say is, what do you see? What do you see there?
A woman. A woman's face. A woman's face.
A face or flowers? It's both. As language users, we're quite happy to go along seeing the same 2 things simultaneously. As analysts, we need to pull them apart. But then how do we record that? There's no answer to that. What I say is, as far as possible, if I want to say that is flowers, then somehow I need to report my results in a way which allows the person who thinks it's a face to see how my data gives you that. But it isn't easy. As I say, for the user, there is no problem. We can switch between them with no problem. Though interestingly, when I show this sometimes or similar, some people end up saying, it's a face, it's a face. What else is there? It's flowers. Some people, when they look at language, only see it one way or the other. But for analysts, we need to cultivate double vision because of metaphor. Metaphor is an inherent, crucial part of language, but for analysts, it is a nightmare. And the same actually happens in transitivity. But, so, what I always like to do is end on a low note to make you feel depressed. As analysts, you have to deal with that somehow, and I don't have an answer. Thank you.